Welcome to Elevate Maryland, a podcast with Maryland focus and Howard County roots. My name's Tom Cole, here in my basement, recording this fine podcast production with my dear co-host, Candace and Reed. Candace, how are you doing this Thursday?
I'm good. I'm doing well. I have to tell you funny. I got a text earlier where someone said, what you and Tom should do during one of these shows is have your partners interview you.
Oh my goodness.
And my first thing I was texting back, I was like, that sounds like a no, delete. That does not sound like a great idea.
Well,
but
then I have to tell Nicole about the podcast. So
I'm sorry?
Then I'd have to tell Nicole about the podcast. She might
Right.
start listening.
Exactly. So look, I'm happy to have Cecilia Munoz on with us today. I started to listen to Cecilia's new book, More Than Ready, after I saw a tweet from John King about it. And so I'm beyond excited about this interview. I've shared the book with my daughter. I also have to say, Cecilia has been encouraging folks to support local bookstores that carry the book. And I now have subscribed to a service to support a bookstore in Maryland. I'm thrilled about that. It's great. And so
is that bookshop.org?
I'm sorry?
Bookshop.org?
Yes.
Cool. That's what I started using over the shutdown as well.
Yes. So really great, and happy to have Cecilia with us today.
Yes. Very excited. And I do think that Dr. John King might need to be sort of enshrined in the Elevate Hall of Fame as our benefactor and, I don't know, our Gandalf, whatever we want to call it. He's so great to us. And obviously so excited about the show. So excited to have our guest on today. First, our three things. Do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So the first thing I wanted to bring up was there's a new poll out about the mayor for the mayor race in Baltimore. And it's a three-way tie. And I think what's interesting about it is that the tie is now between Mary Miller, who was on the show just this past Sunday, who it sort of seems like came out of nowhere, tied with Sheila Dixon, who's the former mayor of Baltimore, obviously, and Brandon Scott, who's also been a guest on the show. We've had all three of them on the show. They all have very interesting ideas about what they would do and in Baltimore. But I thought we've seen a surge from Mary Miller, and I thought that was interesting, and it looks like it's locked.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's as someone else said on Twitter the other day, this is an election that is going to go deep into the summer in terms of counting ballots. It's going to be tight. People are going to say they didn't get their ballots. It's going to be disputed. It's not going to be pretty down the stretch. But, you know, I feel very fortunate that we've had all three of the front runners on the show. I can say, having interviewed, I think, all but one of the major candidates, that Baltimore should be very excited about the choices that they have before them. They're some really excellent people. I am particularly partial to Brandon Scott and TJ Smith. Those are two that just after those interviews, I really, they stuck with me. And listen, Mary Miller, Sheila Dixon, they were great interviews too, and they're great people. There was something about both Brandon and TJ that connected with me.
Yeah.
But it's the race to watch. Baltimore is set up for new leadership, a new beginning, and it needs it now more than ever. So let's keep watching it.
We'll keep watching. We will definitely keep watching that. Also, I don't have my ballot yet, and I'm upset about that.
Now you're in the position I was. The primary. And
I always vote. So what else are you thinking about?
So what I'm thinking about is, and we're going to get into this, I think, in a later show in the three things, is the Howard County budget. New amendments were put in. It significantly just chops the budget to pieces. $90 million out of the capital budget, $20 million out of the operating budget. We're talking about flood mitigation. We're talking about affordable housing. We're talking about ADA accessibility. Very bad cuts, devastating. But what I was thinking about, and what some of our listeners have pointed out, was Wes Moore's show, and how Wes Moore said, now more than ever, it's the time to invest.
Yes.
And the thing about that is we have 20% unemployment. Howard County has a AAA bond rating, which means Howard County can access capital cheaper than the private sector can. If anyone is in a position to put people to work and get the economy moving, if you believe in Keynesian economics at all, if you believe in the New Deal, this is not the time for austerity measures. And so Wes Moore, if you're smarter than Wes Moore, county council members, then you got to show your work. I don't think you are.
Yeah.
And I think Westmore was right.
I think he was right too. It was interesting. The timing on this is, we didn't set this up obviously, but he talked about it being the time now to invest in the critical programs that will support the less fortunate, that will support and look at health disparities and other disparities that we have. And now's not the time to cut those important programs. Now's not the time to make policy decisions like that. And so we'll dig a little deeper on a future show. After I have a little bit more time to read what's being cut. But
I got some cliff notes for you, Candace.
Yeah, please, because now's not the time. So what's the last thing you're thinking about, or is this me?
So it could be both of us.
Go for it.
I'm thinking about it too.
Yep.
So I'll go.
Okay.
Comptroller Francho has his Take It Outside campaign, which he's talking about getting restaurants outside, getting seating outside. And listen, respect to the comptroller. I think sooner or later we'll have him on the show. He canceled on the last date that we had him scheduled, but we do need to get our restaurants moving again, and we need to do it safely. And I think that safely does not mean that our restaurants should have to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in investments in making these little pod bubbles for people to eat. I mean, if they choose to do that and that lets them be able to open sooner, that's wonderful. But what the comptroller was saying is when you're outside, the studies have shown that's a safer way for people to frequent restaurants, for people to go about their everyday life. Outdoor activities are okay. So let's start converting some of our parking lots to dining areas. And I think on top of that, there is a land use policy that I would like to see Howard County embrace a little bit more, which is that we have too much parking. When you talk about mass transit, you're really not talking about bus lines, and you're really not talking about rail. You're talking about too much parking. Because if you have surplus parking, people are going to drive everywhere. If you don't have enough parking, mass transit can fill an important role. When do you see the shuttle in greatest use in Ellicott City? The only time they have it, for Midnight Madness, because all the parking's filled.
Everything's, yeah.
So let's talk about cutting back on parking. Let's talk about taking that money that would otherwise be put into maintaining roads and things like that into mass transit. And maybe the first thing we do is we get rid of some of the parking requirements for restaurants, let them put some seating there. And the next thing you know, we'll be riding buses, Candace.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I think, these times call for folks to be innovative. I think it's creative and innovative for Francho to be thinking in that way. We've talked with friends who said, why can't we do that? And why can't we look at that in Howard County? And I hope that's something that we explore here as well, with Francho sort of setting the policy guidelines for the state. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I think we need to, and we've talked about this previously on the show, this pandemic has exposed some things that we need to do differently, and this is one for sure. So
yes. Why don't you formally invite our guest onto the show, Candace?
I will. Cecilia Munoz is Vice President for Public Interest Technology and Local Initiatives at New America. Prior to joining New America in 2017, she served for 8 years on President Obama's senior staff, first as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, followed by 5 years as a Director of Domestic Policy Council. Before working in government, she was Senior Vice President at the National Council of La Raza, the nation's largest Hispanic policy and advocacy organization, where she served for 20 years. Munoz is also a Senior Fellow at Results for America, a nonprofit that advances the use of data and evidence in policy making. Boy, do we need that more than ever. She received a MacArthur Fellowship in 2000 for her work on immigration and civil rights, and serves on the boards of the Open Society and MacArthur Foundations, as well as the nonprofit Protect Democracy Project. She's the author of More Than Ready, Be Strong and Be You, and Other Lessons for Women of Color on the Rise, which was published in April of 2020. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Good. So we get such rich answers when we ask our guests to tell their stories about themselves, and our listeners love this. And so let's start with the Cecilia Munoz story. Please tell us that.
So I am a policy nerd. I've lived in Maryland for 30 years, but I'm from Michigan. I'm a Latina from Michigan. There's Midwestern Latinos are a thing. Parents are immigrants from Bolivia. I was born in Detroit. And I'm a specialist in a bunch of areas of public policy, starting with immigration. I come from one of those big sprawling immigrant families. And I have been working on immigration, civil rights, criminal justice, education, healthcare policy for my entire career. I came to the DC area, more than 30 years ago, and to work in the civil rights movement. You described the National Council of La Raza, where I was for 20 years. I started my career in this area when, back in the late 1980s, when as a community, the Hispanic community was still pretty invisible in DC, pretty invisible in policymaking. I've spent a lot of my career just explaining who we are and that we didn't all just get here yesterday, and that, we have a history in this land that goes back 500 years, and that our future and the future of the country are very much intertwined. And that's what my work has been about. And I got my arm twisted, actually, to serve in the Obama administration.
We'll talk more about that.
Yeah. But I was there for 8 years, and it was, aside from being a parent, that one of the most challenging experiences in my life, but also just amazing. So to my astonishment, I worked for 8 years in government, and I'm still doing policy. I'm doing it now at a think tank in DC called New America, where public interest technology is about using the tools of technology to deliver what government delivers for people more effectively, which is my current obsession. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, but I live in Silver Spring, raised 2 daughters here. I'm hunkered down here with my husband. We barely go out of the house just to get groceries at this point. But, feel very lucky that I have work that I could do from home, and that it connects at some level to this crisis that we're in, because we kind of need all of us to be engaged.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, now more than ever, using technology is critical. I do want to just take a step back to what you were talking about a moment ago with immigration. Now, we could spend an entire show talking about immigration, particularly your experience and knowledge related to that area. I guess I would ask a little bit narrower of a question, where immigration is often treated like one of those binary public policy issues where you're either right or you're left, and there's no path in between. And my question for you is, where is there opportunity? Where is there some sort of, where's the wedge that we're going to start to break through this issue that has been really for decades been a stumbling block for policymakers?
Yep. It's a great question, and it's totally there. There is totally actually a room for common ground. Our problem is actually not so much a policy problem. It's that at the moment we're in a frame, that's kind of dictated by our current commander-in-chief, that's about being tough versus being weak. Like, if you have to pick, you got to pick one of those, and that's the choice he wants us to make. And that's the wrong choice. I mean, for all of his toughness, all he's doing is making things worse. If we agree that we have a challenge at the border, which I think, no matter how you feel about immigrants, everybody in the country agrees on, the right frame for having the debate is, being smart about how to fix it versus not being so smart about how to fix it, right? And it is entirely possible to fix what's broken about our immigration system. We passed a bill through the Senate with 68 votes in 2013. There's been kind of bipartisan agreement about what can fix this system that helps undocumented people get on the right side of the law, but in a way that's fair and orderly, and that updates our legal immigration system. But it's all about making sure if the American people think it's going to be fair and it's going to be orderly, and there are going to be a set of rules and people are going to follow them, they're prepared to be pretty generous. So that there's plenty of room for that common ground. But the problem is that we have leadership right now that isn't interested in common ground. He's much more interested in kind of using the issue as a wedge, which he does, frankly, pretty effectively.
Yeah. So we're going to get into the book in a second, but while we have you here, we have to ask the question about the Domestic Policy Council. So it included secretaries of many of the agencies. And so what was it like to pull those folks together to help create President Obama's domestic policy agenda? Because you had some heavy hitters there.
Some serious heavy hitters, really committed people. And frankly, it was an amazing team. The president chose people who were interested in working together to try to make the country a better place. So we did this one of my favorite, extremely nerdy types of policymaking, which is about finding ways to invest in places. And, this was a group of cabinet members who would sit in a room, and somebody like Secretary Arne Duncan, who was John King's predecessor as Secretary of Education, would say, all right, here's the money that I have. Let me put this in the middle of the table, because if my resources get linked to your resources from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or your resources from the Department of Health and Human Services, together, maybe we can do much more than any of us would have done alone. That's like not normally the way that government works. Normally people are like, all right, these are my resources, and like, leave me alone, and I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to try to get credit for it. The spirit that we worked in was, all right, let's put it all on the table and figure out how we can do better than government usually does. And so it was a joy to be convening those people. It's not to say that they didn't disagree with each other sometimes. Frankly, they're supposed to disagree with each other sometimes. So my job was also to be the person who, when we were making a hard decision, and the decisions that got to the president, as he used to say, like, he only got the hard decisions, the easy stuff got decided, further down the food chain. My job was to make sure that everybody got heard, right? That everybody got a chance to say their say. And I would have, like an hour to have them all sitting there. And if the ones who disagree, my job was to make sure they all got to lay out their argument, so that the president had the information that he needed to make a good decision. And then if the process was good, if I'd done my job well, then win or lose, everybody could walk away from that table saying, all right, so now we're going to implement this decision, because it's not because the process was unfair. The president just decided it, and not in my direction, but that's okay, because I got heard, and it was a tough call, and now here we go, let's get this done. So it was really, super challenging, but I got to work with amazing people who were in love with the idea of public service, and in love with the idea of what we might be able to accomplish for people. And I have to say, I miss that spirit a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do.
What you did is so impressive, and I want to sort of circle back to it. In the White House, I have to presume that all the people in that room bring with them distinguished careers, big resumes, and often big egos. And
Yep.
And what would you say is, if you were to sort of advise yourself coming into that position, what would you tell them was key in terms of, one, it seems like you would have to have their trust, but then also, two, sort of mediating amongst those big egos to make sure the president didn't have to do it?
Yeah, I've reflected on this a lot, because as I've written a book coming out of this experience, and that, you're right. There are a lot of brilliant people with pretty serious egos in the room. And you would start by thinking, well, shoot, I have to be one of those, right? I got to take up a lot of space in the room, and that's kind of not how I'm wired. Much more of a low key person. But what I learned, and if I could advise myself from day one of that job, is your job is not to take up all the oxygen in the room. Your job is to make sure that the president gets the information that he needs. And you don't have to be the superstar. It's not really about taking credit. It's about kind of the greater good, and about developing trust and reading the room, and making sure everybody has confidence that they're going to say their say, that their work, that their commitment to all of this is going to be respected. Even, when the moment comes when he's got to make a tough call, and he's either going to go your way or not go your way. And so, I thought a lot about this. I'm a public policy person. I have serious policy credentials, but it's not being about the smartest person in the room. It's not about being the most eloquent person in the room. And frankly, if you're in the room with Barack Obama, you're neither going to be the smartest person nor the most eloquent, right? It's about having the confidence that what you bring to it is important. I was frequently the only Latino in the room. And that, the other people in the room need what you bring. And your ability to just understand them as humans, and understand them as professionals, and make sure that they're getting what they need to participate in a good process. Those kind of people skills turned out to be the most important skill set.
This is a good segue into the book, and so let's talk about that. It's called More Than Ready, Be Strong and Be You, and Other Lessons for Women of Color on the Rise. As I said, it resonated with me. Why did you write it?
I didn't leave the White House thinking I was going to write a book at all. as I said, I'm a pretty low key person, and I did what the women that I worked with did, which is we went and found other jobs and tried, found other ways to try to do good work for the world. But there were some women in my life who kept pressing me and saying, you're the first Latino ever to serve in this position. You've learned some stuff over 30 years. You should think about what you have to say. And I did what women, especially women of color, do. I was like, no, who am I to put myself out there in that way? And who's going to really care what I have to say? But they didn't let me off the hook. And they said, and my boss, a woman named Anne Marie Slaughter, who leads New America, was really clear with me. She said, that's what women do. We discount ourselves. We think somebody else are the ones who should be getting out there and telling their stories. And that's why we haven't had a woman president yet, and that's why there aren't enough of us in positions of authority in government or in the corporate boardroom or in the university sector or wherever it is. And that forced me to think about, all right, what do I have to say? And I realized, I do a lot of public speaking all over the country. And actually, what I have to say, I say all the time. And in particular, I tell stories from, my career. And invariably, when I'm done, somebody comes up to me afterwards. And 100% of the time, that person is a woman. And most of the time, she's a woman of color. And she'll say something like, that story you told about self-doubt, or that story you told about being afraid or about being the only one in the room, that's me. And thank you for saying that, because I thought I was the only one. And so the reason I wrote the book is because we're all going through the same stuff, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And as a result, we all feel like we're navigating this alone, and we don't need to navigate it alone because we're all going through the same stuff. And I think we should talk about it some more.
That's such a good point. And you interview 7 outstanding women who are also first in their respective fields in the book. And so what was it like to interview them? Again, heavy hitters.
The joy. It was a total joy to interview them. So they were, they were women. So 3 African-American women, 2 Asian-American women, 2 Native American women. They're amazing. They're women that I greatly admire. Some are older than me, some are younger than me. But what was astonishing to me is that we really all do go through the same stuff. All of us had issues. I had questions about so do you have to think extra hard about what you wear, to feel like you're coming across as a professional? And everybody was like, oh my God, let me tell you about that, right? Or questions about so tell me, are there times when you've doubted yourself, or times when you felt like they invited you into this room because they needed a little diversity, but they're not going to take you seriously? And the same thing, everybody was like, oh, where do I even start? Because we've all been through those same things. So that it was really affirming, actually, because, my assumption was these experiences are not unique to me. And, sure enough, they weren't. But some of what they had to say, they were really honest with me. One of the women shared that, she's not sure she got the family balancing work and family right, which was not an easy thing for her to admit. I had a Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who's one of the women I interviewed, who is amazing, first South Asian woman to be elected to Congress, who used to be terrified of public speaking. Who, and you see her on TV all the time, and she talks about how, in a previous job, when she had to give a presentation, she would call in sick because she was so scared to speak in front of people. And it reminded me that even some of the most extraordinary women, have been through some hard stuff and are brave enough to talk about it. And hopefully that should give the rest of us the courage to recognize, you can be scared. It's okay. Because you're not alone. And because that doesn't mean you don't have what it takes, because of course you do.
I've got a clumsy question that I hope when it comes out of my mouth is a little bit more eloquent than it is in my head. But do you find that there's something about the progressive movement or Democrats that in some ways gives cover for what you described, that in some ways gives cover for the marginalization of women, for the marginalization of people of color? So that's my question.
It's a great question. And absolutely. So I'll give you an example. I have been invited to a meeting in the following way by a progressive, somebody who I admire, who does really good work for the world, who called me once and said, you know what, we're having this meeting And we realized we didn't have any women or any people of color. So can you come?
Oh my
Right?
goodness. Yeah.
Trying to do the right thing,
Yep.
give them some credit for that. But, come on, like it's
Right.
a way of communicating, like, not even sure I care about what you have to say. I just realized I need somebody like you in the room in order to get it right. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. And a lot of, it's kind of, one of the women I interviewed, Kathy Cochin, a Chinese American leader, said the same thing. She said, I'm part of a civil rights coalition, and we know we need to be standing up for each other. But, I get invited to tables where, like, me and the other Asians sit on the ends, and, we can barely get up any oxygen at all.
Hmm.
And you wonder, like, am I just here because people recognized that they needed some diversity? But then she said what the rest of the women I interviewed said. It's like, but you know what? If you're at the table, you use your seat at the table.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Regardless of why they invited you, you are there, and you need to go for it.
I love that. There's a part in the book where you talk about the 2016 presidential campaign, and you reference a conversation that you had with senior advisor to President Obama, Valerie Jarrett. And so talk with us a little bit about that conversation and why you felt it was so important to speak up about the hateful rhetoric being spoken by then, I guess, candidate Donald Trump.
So this was at the very beginning of the Republican primary cycle, where Donald Trump had announced his candidacy by referring to Mexicans as rapists. And, all of the political class was just kind of rolling their eyes and not taking him seriously. And, I was at the senior table, which met every morning in the Obama White House. And there was a question about whether or not the president should respond to some of the uglier things that this, candidate was saying. And the political people were saying, no, this is awesome, because the Republicans are just going to fight with each other and eat each other's lunch. And this is really good for us as Democrats. So, like, leave it alone. And I understood why that was the political wisdom. And I'm a policy person, not a politics person. So my first thought was, well, maybe I shouldn't say anything. But then I thought, no, this makes me really uncomfortable. And I tried to explain, I think that's maybe not good enough. And the conversation, continued that first time. And I walked out of there feeling like they didn't really hear me. I didn't express why this was a problem clearly enough. And, I learned one of my strategies to help me be successful in my job was to seek feedback from people that I trusted. And one of the people I trusted the most was Valerie Jarrett. And so I walked into her office and closed the door and said, this isn't sitting right with me. I don't think I expressed myself clearly enough. Walk me through, how did it sound to you? What resonated, what didn't resonate? And, I could always count on Valerie to tell me the truth. And, she's my friend, but she's also somebody who needed the president to succeed. And she told me two things. She walked me through what was strong and what wasn't strong about my argument. And I actually practiced for a while on my own so that I could make the case properly. But then the other thing she said to me was, the president's going to get asked this question. And you also know that whatever his other advisors think, you also know that you don't have to worry about his answer. And that was, of course, true. But I did find a way to explain what I meant to, folks in the room who are good folks. It's not that they didn't appreciate what I had to offer, but they didn't understand, especially the ones who, didn't have the experience of being called those kinds of names in that kind of a way.
So I guess sort of building off of that, in some manner, you reference in your book Imposter Syndrome, and that you've also said in the past that women, or I think we've seen in various writings, that women often have to be asked to run for office over 7 times before they feel they're ready. And that's, for men, it's, you even say you're looking good today, and the man thinks that he should be president. So I guess I'd love to hear, you've risen to amazing heights of leadership and consultation with the president. How have you worked to overcome imposter syndrome?
So I felt it a lot coming into the White House. Again, especially when you're the first person in a role, if you haven't ever seen someone like you in a role, then it's not just you that thinks, "Ooh, do I really belong here?" But there are other people who think that too. And one of the stories I tell in the book is that when I was promoted to domestic policy advisor, the chief of staff at the time was a guy named Bill Daley, who's a very good guy and a committed public servant. He left the White House about a month later and told a couple people who were writing books about the first term that he was disappointed that I'd been promoted, that he had wanted somebody else for the job. And the suggestion was, this is an affirmative action hire and she's probably not so
Yeah.
qualified. And that cost me about 2 years of confidence, because I thought, I would sit at that table with all of those brilliant people and think, well, shoot, if he thought that about me, how do I know that's not what these other folks think? And that's I tell the story not so much to dime him out, but because it's a common experience. And I realized that I was developing strategies for dealing with that sense of, wow, maybe people think that I'm not up to this challenge, and maybe they're just humoring me here. And more importantly, the other 7 women that I spoke to said the same thing. They'd all been through some version of the same thing. And one of the strategies that we all use is we prepare. We do our homework. We make sure if we're walking into a meeting where we have a responsibility, that we are ready to meet that responsibility, and that we're I think afraid of making a mistake, and so we work incredibly hard to avoid making a mistake, because a mistake, if you're the only one in the room or the first one, a mistake isn't just a mistake, right? It's a reflection on you as a human, on you as a professional, and on everybody who looks like you, everybody who's like you. So being like ultra prepared is one strategy. Asking for feedback, as I described with somebody like Valerie Jarrett or other people that I trusted, is another strategy. And making sure that you have a team of some kind around you. Like if you're a supervisor, then that's your team. Even if you're not a supervisor, having a cohort of people that you can sit down and talk to and say, and this is something that happened to me earlier in my career. I was out on Capitol Hill today, and a member of the United States Senate complimented me on my English today. And have a group of people where you don't have to explain why that is crazy and ridiculous, and who will give you feedback and remind you that when you doubt yourself, that they don't doubt you, and so that you can kind of lean into that to give you confidence. But the book is called More Than Ready, and that it refers to the fact that I think the world is more than ready for what we offer as women of color, but it also refers to the fact that we all over prepare.
And if I can ask a follow-up question on that, because so in the male culture, there are sayings like "fake it till you make it" or "be bold and break things." Have you found that the necessity and compulsion to be so prepared and over prepared, have you found that has impaired your ability to act in the way that you want to act, to sort of be aggressive in your decision making and in countering the males in the room who are faking it until they make it, and the like?
So I'm smiling because absolutely not. So being prepared doesn't mean you can't be fierce, right? It just means you're not making stuff up. Right? So
Yes.
I think we prepare because we don't want to be caught in a mistake. And frankly, when you're advising the president of the United States, the worst thing you can do is try to fake it till you make it. Right? But we are living with the results of people giving the man bad information.
Absolutely.
You don't want to be that person. So, I am not a believer in fake it till you make it. And frankly, women, people of color, are kind of not in a position to do that so much, because right, Candace, we make a mistake.
That's exactly right.
Right?
my father said you gotta be better than everybody, a little bit better than everybody.
That's exactly right. I got that advice too when I first came to the DC area, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you talked about this in your opening about your story, and you also talk about it in the book about potentially not taking the job at the White House because of the impact it could have on your kids who were very young at the time. And so I'm a mother and a professional, and I heard that and I was like, oh my gosh, yes. You eventually took the job, But talk with us a little bit about what that was like and what was going through your mind at that time.
Yeah. So this was in 2008. My mother passed in April of 2008.
Mm.
The president was elected in November. And I got a call a couple weeks later to interview for the White House. And of course, I was totally flattered. And I went into the interview because I wanted to know what they were thinking about immigration reform. But I was pretty sure I didn't want the job. I was happy doing the work that I was doing. I was very challenged. I had teenage girls at home. And because of my mother's passing, I was really, really focused on, being the best mother I could be. And so when they offered me the job, the intergovernmental affairs job, I soul searched and I was so anxious about turning my family's life upside down that I said no.
Hmm.
And the folks that I interviewed with said, we think it might not end here. And I thought, oh, come on, ridiculous. This town is crawling with people who want these jobs. And of course, you're going to find somebody else awesome for the job. And then the next day, I was actually driving my younger daughter after school, and my cell phone rings, and it's a Chicago number, and it's Rahm Emanuel, the incoming chief of staff, who's he's making this argument about how we're going to make it a family-friendly White House. And then he says, "Can you hold on for a minute?" And the next words I hear are, "This is Barack Obama," and I'm not taking no for an answer, which is just ridiculous. Still crazy to me that happened. I was very concerned about it. I of course said yes, and I'm totally grateful that I did. And my kids, who are now 27 and 24, it turned out great. But it did. The advice I got, and it was true, was if you're taking a job like that, you get one thing aside from working all the time. And if that thing is your kids, then good. But you've chosen, and you get no other things. You don't get movies. You won't read books. You won't go to concerts, like whatever. I used to sing in a choir. I couldn't do that. And that turned out to be good advice. And 8 years of working and family is a lot. And it when I left, I had to learn how to do other things again, like read books and go to choir practice. And it turns out to be very hard to unwind that. Yeah. But I had the opportunity to ask my kids. As I was writing the book, I thought, because I'd agonized so much about the impact that my work was having on them. And I realized, well, shoot, they're grown. I can just ask them. So I did. And they contributed to the book they wrote about what it was like for them. And the amazing thing to me is that I agonized about it so much, and they think it's kind of cute that I agonize. Like, they don't really understand the question. They're like, "Mom, that's just who you are and what you do. Like, we're fine. What were you so upset about?" And I found that really reassuring. And my colleagues who have little kids, who are right now doing all the things you're doing, working from home, trying to homeschool, it's so hard, and they're agonizing about it so much. I keep telling them, what you're experiencing is you're feeling like a person who's doing everything halfway, and I remember that feeling. But what your kids are experiencing is a devoted parent who loves them, who's doing the best they can, and they're going to be fine. So like, you can take the stress level down a couple notches because they're going to be okay.
I'm going to take that bit of this podcast and send it to every single friend I have. That's so important to hear. It's so important to hear.
So yep. What I've loved the most about this interview is that I sort of came to it thinking we were going to be talking about domestic policy, and it has ended up being a much better and much more, I would say, useful conversation about elevating voices. And that actually, our podcast has a little motto. It's elevate voices, build community, and present solutions. So I wanted to know if you might comment on what we and our listeners can do to elevate voices, to make sure that women and men and women of color are not marginalized, that they're not used because there is not diversity in the room, that we're actually elevating their voice, being heard, being partners, and the like.
Such a good question. There are all kinds of things you can do, including noticing when we're in the room and making sure to create space to, say things like, what she just said just now was really terrific, and I just want to thank her for saying it and make sure everybody heard, like that kind of stuff. And when we're not in the room, be the person who says, wait a minute, are we really going to have this conversation in a room full of white people or in a room that has only men in it? And if there's only one in the room, don't make them be the person to say that. Because it's still, I mean, this still happens to me all the time. I work on issues of public policy. I work on issues having to do with poverty and economic mobility. And twice in the last year, I've been invited to meetings of scholars and doers, good people who work on poverty for a living, where I was one of two people in the room who were people of color. And, you know, I had to be the one to say it. So, you know, to have your radar going for, am I making space? Am I helping bring other people to the table? Am I strengthening their voices and helping elevate their voices when they are at the table? And am I creating spaces for them when they're not at the table? All of that matters. And you know, something that a couple of women did for me early in my career, which is the kind of thing anybody can do, is, you know, in this case, I was testifying before Congress. It was my very first hearing. And a couple of women, colleagues in the back of the room, bothered to call my boss afterwards to just, and you know, this was before email, but you could do that by shooting a note, just saying, you know what, you weren't there, but we just want to tell you we were there and we thought you did a great job. Doing that for people, it is enormously impactful and it's easy. It doesn't take very much. But for somebody's boss to say, oh, you know, maybe I got a star on my hands because somebody bothered to say, you know what, she was having a good day and I appreciated her eloquence.
So what I hear you saying is that a big important part of that is when the voices are there, you magnify them and you recognize them.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So important. So important. We could talk for probably another 2 hours about this. I could personally talk for probably 4, but we are going to get into our fun questions that we call the Elevate 8, which allow our listeners to get to know a little bit more about you personally.
Okay.
The first one is, what was the last book, movie, and music recommendation you made to a friend or family member? Got to hit all 3: book, movie, music.
I have to do all 3?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You're not working in the White House anymore, so you can do things, right?
and you can recommend your own book.
Yeah, your book, you can just check that off as your own.
Okay, so I will. So fair enough, I will recommend my own book, More Than Ready, because I think it's, because I hope that it's helpful. Music.
I second that. It is helpful.
Okay, my music answer is really nerdy and a little bit embarrassing.
We get a lot of those, believe it or not, with our Policy Wonky show.
Okay, but I might out-nerd everybody. So I sing in a group in Montgomery County called the National Philharmonic.
Oh.
And we're rehearsing the Mozart Requiem when everything shut down. And the Mozart Requiem is this wonderful dramatic piece, and it's a really pretty darn good soundtrack for the times we live in. So the Mozart Requiem is the
Okay.
All right. No, that's good.
That is good. And movie?
The Princess Bride, which is something I watched about 600,000 times with my children.
I can't get my wife to watch it. I can't get her to watch a movie.
What?
It's one of the most important movies ever made. She won't watch it.
Oh.
We know every line of this thing, and we could watch it 100 more times.
Us too. My kid loves it.
All right. So here's the tricky one. We told you before the show that there was a tricky one. This is it. What is the most unpopular, benign opinion that you hold?
The most unpopular, benign opinion.
Or another way we say it is, what's the most insignificant hill you'd be willing to die on?
Oh, wow.
We can give examples. Mine, I think, is the best. You know, I'll just say it. So at Thanksgiving, when folks want to have cranberry, I think that cranberry, whether it's in the can with those wrinkles or whatever, or whether somebody's mama makes it, is the nastiest thing I've ever tasted in my life.
Oh, wow.
Yours is not the best. I get gifts in response to mine, which is, I don't like cake. I think cake is bad.
Well, that's ridiculous.
Right.
All right. So mine's a slightly weird one. So I am not Jewish, but I have the great good fortune to have Jewish members of my family. So I get invited to Passover. And I think gefilte fish are delicious.
Oh, all right. We have a positive one. Well, I guess we've had people say they like fruit on pizza. So that
people love to hate on the gefilte fish, but I actually think they're delicious.
Oh,
it's a good one.
Okay. what podcasts, if any, are you listening to?
On Being, Krista Tippett.
Ah, very nice.
It's kind of spiritual, kind of thoughtful, and I feel like I'm trying I need sources of inspiration, so that's a good one.
What is the best meal in Maryland? So this is a meal that you have to be able to go out and get. I know you said you've just been going to get groceries, but if you could go out and get a meal in Maryland, where would you get it? What would it be?
Well, so there's definitely the crab with the Old Bay seasoning and the
You like crab? Okay.
I do. You know, I'm married to my husband's a vegetarian who eats no meat, fish, eggs, anything.
Oh.
So getting a meal like that, like for him, a meal where you are pounding on the critter and ripping it is unusually horrifying. So that's a particular treat, and it's a very Maryland thing.
All right, good. I'll take that.
What activity or hobby have you rediscovered during quarantine?
I've become that person who's baking bread.
Is it sourdough? Because that's like a thing.
You got the starter?
Learned how to do sourdough. In my defense, I started the sourdough 3 years ago when I left the White House.
Okay.
It was like my way of slowing way down and trying to do something that like has a result at the end of the day. So I got to sourdough before everybody else. But oh yeah, I'm totally invested. It's driving my husband completely nuts.
Nice.
Trendsetter.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
Don't be afraid, I think.
I like that.
Good one. What has been your biggest challenge and how did you learn from it?
Wow. So I mean, well, certainly being a parent, but actually working in the White House was easily the biggest challenge of my life. It took, as I said when I left, it took all I had and some that I didn't know I had. I had to find reservoirs of confidence, of strength, of courage that I didn't know I had, and so I'm really, really glad I did it. But it really did take everything I had.
So this is the question we end all of our podcasts with, and the question is, what do we all need to do to elevate Maryland? But because you spend a lot of your time thinking on national level, I would invite you to answer it either way. Either what do we need to do to elevate Maryland, or what do we need to do to elevate this country?
I'll go with Maryland. I think it's the answer is true for the country as well. I mean, I've lived here for 30 years. My daughters were raised here. Elevating Maryland's gotten to be about elevating its people, making sure that everybody, especially now, right? You were talking about this at the beginning, how this crisis has really exposed a lot that needs to change. Elevating Maryland means making sure every Marylander gets a great education and has a great opportunity to make their contribution in a way that is enough to sustain their families. We have such richness here in terms of our population. Extraordinary diversity, extraordinary heart, extraordinary history and tradition. And we need to invest more in our folks.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for coming on the show. As I mentioned, your book really resonated with me, and I think this interview shows why to many people. And I am very grateful that you wrote it and very grateful that you chose to join us tonight. So thank you so much.
Yes,
well,
thank you.
Thank you both for what you do. It's extraordinary and wonderful, and makes me proud to be a Marylander, and I'm honored to be on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody go buy the book now.